They came on a Wednesday. Of course it was a Wednesday. That's the kind of day petty tyrants love, right in the middle of the week when everyone else has better things to do. I was sitting on the porch of my cabin, black coffee in one hand, volume of Thoreau in the other, pretending to enjoy retirement when I heard tires crunching over gravel. I already knew what it was before I saw them. Not many people drive up the west side of the lake. Fewer still do it in a spotless white SUV with a magnetic emblem that screams Homeowners Association louder than a yappy Pomeranian at a barbecue. Two of them got out, clipboard guy and smile too wide lady. You know the type. The self-appointed mayors of cul-de-sacs, folks who believe that being on the HOA board is just one rung below the UN Security Council. "Good morning, sir," the woman chirped, walking up my steps like she owned the place. "We've been reviewing the properties in the Northview Shores district and noticed your cabin here isn't listed in the HOA directory." I took a sip of coffee, didn't offer her any. "That's because it isn't part of your HOA," I replied calmly. "Never was." Clipboard guy checked his notes, squinting like I'd just told him water wasn't wet. "Well, the updated zoning lines place you squarely in our district now," he said, tapping his laminated map. "We'll need to get you signed up. It's mostly standard monthly dues, landscaping guidelines, and regulations. You'll need to adjust yours." Ah, the dock. A modest 30-foot stretch of aged wood and steel bolts, built by hand 15 years ago when I bought this place. Built for solitude, not HOA scrutiny. I smiled. "You didn't check the records, did you?" They paused. That kind of pause that happens when confidence slams face first into uncertainty. "No need," Smile Too Wide said, recovering. "It's standard for the area now. We've already notified the sheriff's department to enforce compliance. We just want everyone to be part of the community." That was when I knew exactly how far they were willing to go. They weren't asking, they were informing me. "I see," I said, nodding. "Then I suppose I should prepare." They smiled, relieved, thought I was going to roll over. They had no idea. But later that day, I had a visitor. Sheriff's deputy pulled up around 3, young guy, nervous, the kind who took the job because he wanted to help people, but ended up stuck enforcing parking violations for power-hungry committees. "Afternoon, Mr. Harrow," he said, shifting from foot to foot. "We've had some complaints about your property not being in compliance with HOA regulations." I didn't say anything for a moment, just let the silence sit between us, until he looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Let me save you some time, deputy," I said, setting down my mug. "This land isn't under any HOA jurisdiction." He scratched the back of his neck. "I've seen the maps. I'm sure you have. But those maps are wrong, or at least incomplete." I went back inside for a moment, returned with a manila folder thicker than a lawyer's conscience. Inside, every title, deed, and plat for this entire valley. "I bought the cabin in 2009, I said, opening the folder. "Then between 2010 and 2017, I purchased the surrounding lots, including the lake itself. Some through auctions, some directly from the county. Turns out people don't value raw land much when there's no infrastructure." Deputy blinked. "You own the lake?" "And the valley, legally. Every tree, every inch of shoreline, even the road they drove in on." He took a step back, visibly recalibrating. "Look, I'm not trying to make trouble," he said. "I'm just doing what the HOA asked." I nodded. "And now you've done it." He left quietly. That evening, I sat at the end of the dock as the sun slipped behind the ridge, the lake catching the last of the light like a secret. It wasn't about the cabin. Not really. It was about control. The HOA had expanded, gotten drunk on its own influence. They thought they could push their borders wherever they pleased, and they just tried to annex land from the wrong man. Let them send their letters. Let them plan their little community events. They didn't know that while they were busy drawing imaginary lines on their meeting room whiteboards, I'd been quietly buying out the real thing under their feet for years. Tomorrow, I'd let them have their meeting. Let them celebrate their expanded district. Then, I'd show up, not with a clipboard, not with a smile, with facts and consequences. HOAs are funny little things. They start as a way to keep lawns trimmed and fences uniform. Before long, they're dictating paint colors, mailbox designs, and the appropriate height for garden gnomes. But like most things that taste of control, they always want more. I found their headquarters, if you could call it that, a beige stucco building nestled between a yoga studio and a strip mall dentist. The kind of place that sells the illusion of importance with a folding table and a sign-in sheet. Northview Shores, HOA. Wednesday night meeting. Open to the public. I decided it was time I became the public. I arrived 5 minutes early. That alone was enough to draw a few raised eyebrows. Some of the board members were already there, fiddling with handouts and bottled water. There was Janet, the clipboard-wielding woman from earlier, now seated front and center, like she owned the oxygen in the room. Her partner in smug, Brad, of course his name was Brad, stood nearby, pointing at an oversized map of the lake and surrounding lots. Except the map had changed. They had drawn my cabin into their kingdom with a red circle, bold text, unregistered structure, non-compliant. Oh, they'd made it official. I took a seat at the back, said nothing, didn't need to, let them perform. The meeting started with pleasantries, treasurer's report, upcoming community events, a bake sale fundraiser, standard suburban propaganda. Then Janet cleared her throat. Now about the annexation process for the Northern Lake properties. I leaned back, watched them lay it out like it was a military campaign. Brad stepped forward. We've decided to officially extend the Northview Shores boundary to include all lakeside properties. These areas will benefit from our services, dock maintenance, property value oversight, safety patrols. He said it with a straight face, like this was Rome expanding into Gaul. No mention, of course, that none of these services had ever crossed the lake. Then came the best part. We've submitted a petition to the county to formally reclassify the valley for HOA jurisdiction, Janet said, grinning. It's just a formality at this point. Ah, the fatal mistake. They thought the county would roll over, because they always had. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't just another property owner trying to protect his deck furniture. But they didn't know I have a folder. Not just folder, the folder. When they opened the floor for questions, I stood. Every head turned. I took my time walking to the front, folder in hand. Just a man in worn boots and an old fishing jacket, carrying the bureaucratic equivalent of a sledgehammer. Mr. Harrow, wasn't it? Janet said, forced smile twitching. That's right, I replied, and I thought I'd bring a few things for your records. Since you're expanding, I laid out the documents one by one on the table. Original land, plats, notarized deeds, water rights transfers, mineral leases, each one legitimate, each one bearing my name. Brad frowned. What is this? I looked him dead in the eye. This is what ownership looks like. You could have heard a pin drop. I bought the valley in pieces, I said. The county had no use for it. Neither did the developers who skipped town after the 2008 crash. So I picked it up, quietly, cheaply. Now I own it. Janet scoffed. That doesn't exempt you from HOA jurisdiction. Oh, but it does, I said calmly. You see, you can't impose HOA authority over land you don't have easement rights to. And according to these documents, the only access road into the valley runs over my property. Which means every time your patrol vehicle drives through, it's trespassing. That landed. Someone in the back coughed. I wasn't done. As for your petition to the county, I spoke with the zoning commissioner this morning. He's reviewing the complaint I filed, complete with the map you handed to the deputy, which redraws legal boundaries without consent. Janet opened her mouth, closed it. I leaned in just enough to make sure she heard me. That's called attempted land fraud. I didn't stay for the rest of the meeting. Didn't need to. I dropped a depth charge in their little pond, and I wanted to be gone before the bubbles hit the surface. On my way out, one of the newer board members caught up to me. Young guy, nervous, reminded me of the deputy. "Hey, Mr. Harrow," he said, "is it true? You really own all of it?" I nodded. Every tree, every dock nail, every fish in that water. They just didn't bother to check. He hesitated. "Why didn't you stop them sooner?" I looked at him, really looked, and then I smiled. "Because sometimes," I said, "you have to let people hang themselves with their own rope." They say arrogance is blind, but I'd argue it's also deaf. The very next morning, I received a notice of violation slipped into my mailbox, unironically marked urgent, final warning. According to the HOA, my unauthorized dock extension, non-conforming structure, and failure to comply with lakefront aesthetic guidelines were grounds for fines totaling $4,780. Cute. Even better, it was signed by Janet herself, using the title Acting Director of External Property Integration. That's not even a real thing. They were inventing bureaucracy on the fly, like medieval barons slapping titles on cousins to justify a land grab. They thought paperwork would scare me. What they didn't realize is that I had already beat 3 corporations, 2 local governments, and 1 embittered ex-business partner in court before most of their board members figured out how escrow works. So I smiled, and I began planning what came next. The time has come to divide and ruin. I didn't go after them directly. That would have been too easy and too quick. No, the key to unraveling a power structure isn't fire, it's corrosion. I started with their contractors. Most HOAs don't handle their own landscaping, waste management, or maintenance. They outsource to local vendors. So I contacted the 3 largest ones in the region, all of whom had small service contracts with Northview Shores. I made them an offer. Exclusive long-term deals to service my properties at 20% above their current HOA rates. They jumped. Just like that, the HOA lost its groundskeeping crew and its dock maintenance vendor. Trash pickup was next. I bought out the local guy's business outright. Paid cash. I didn't even need it. But I wanted them to panic when the dumpsters stopped being emptied. I watched it unfold from my porch. The lakefront lawns started browning. Docks began to sag. Piles of garbage lingered past the pickup dates. Their little utopia began to look more like the trailer park they'd always mocked in town hall meetings. A few of the residents noticed. That's when I made my move. The letters. I sent 27 personalized letters, each one addressed to a homeowner along the HOA boundary. Every resident whose house sat on the edge of the district but didn't quite have full lake access. The ones who paid dues but didn't reap the benefits. Inside each envelope, an offer to lease private access to the lake via my side. Low cost, no strings. A quiet reminder that their HOA had 0 say in what happened on my land. 12 people responded in the first week. 7 of them canceled their association memberships outright, citing lack of services and unprofessional conduct from board leadership. 2 of them, board members. Janet's reaction? Priceless. I know this because someone anonymously forwarded pressures. They still hadn't realized I was the pressure. A week later, the county zoning board met to review the HOA's expansion petition. I was there, not front row, middle of the chamber. Quiet. Janet brought a binder the size of a toaster oven. Brad wore a suit 2 sizes too big. Their lawyer, a guy with more ego than credentials, spoke for 10 minutes about community cohesion and standardizing environmental protections across lakefront properties. I didn't say much when it was my turn, just handed over my binder. Smaller, thicker, with a notarized letter from the county recorder's office confirming the chain of ownership for the valley. Then I added one last thing. A motion to formally designate my property and the surrounding valley as a private conservation district, removing it entirely from any future jurisdictional claims by residential associations, current or otherwise. It passed, unanimously, and that, as they say, was checkmate. 3 days later, Janet resigned. Officially, she cited personal reasons. Unofficially, the board turned on her the moment that fines stopped being paid and the community barbecue was canceled due to logistical issues. Brad disappeared from the HOA website. Rumor has it that he moved 2 towns over and sells insurance now. The new interim board president sent me a message through a mutual acquaintance. No hard feelings, maybe we can work together in the future. I didn't reply, because people like that only understand consequences, not cooperation. And I was still far from finished. I could have stopped there. The HOA was bleeding members, their reputation tarnished, their budget crumbling faster than a cheap retaining wall in spring thaw. But this wasn't about inconvenience anymore. This was personal. Janet didn't just try to steal land. She sent law enforcement to my doorstep under false pretenses. She tried to humiliate me, and she nearly succeeded, until I decided I'd had enough. I waited exactly 3 weeks after her resignation to begin, just long enough for her to think the dust had settled. Then I went for the foundation. I filed a complaint with the county ethics board. Simple, elegant, devastating. Inside, evidence that Janet, while serving on the HOA board, had steered multiple maintenance and landscaping contracts to her brother-in-law's business, Green Horizon Property Services. No bids, no transparency, and certainly no permission from HOA members. Of course, I didn't stop there. I included her personal property appraisal from last year, showing she had used an inflated valuation from those same contractors to refinance her home at favorable terms. Conflict of interest? Absolutely. Fraud? Almost certainly. I wasn't interested in prosecution. I was interested in her name never appearing on a board again. 2 weeks later, the ethics board forwarded the report to the state. And suddenly, Janet had lawyers. The kind who charge by the minute and sweat under fluorescent lights. Last I heard, her house was listed for sale, twice the asking price, desperate to catch a break. It didn't. I hadn't forgotten Brad. He was easier, dumber. A public records request gave me his business filings. Turned out his consulting firm was just a name printed on the same laptop he used to play HOA slideshow presentations. Worse, he'd listed himself as an independent HOA compliance contractor in job applications, claiming experience negotiating zoning disputes, which would have been hilarious if it weren't so sad. So I sent anonymous emails to every HOA in the county. Subject line, "Before you hire Brad, read this." Attached, the county hearing transcript, copies of the fake maps, and an unedited video of his meltdown at the final board meeting. He hasn't worked since. A friend at the township clerk's office said he applied for a job managing parking permits and got denied. Something about recent credibility issues. Credibility. Imagine that. I sent one letter. One, handwritten. No return address, no threats, no arrogance. Just 3 sentences on thick, cream-colored paper. You should have left me alone. You mistook silence for weakness. You now live in the valley I own. Don't forget it. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. She knew who it was from. The lake is quiet again now. No board meetings, no patrol cars, no sudden dock inspections or passive-aggressive notes about non-stay. Exists, technically, but it limps, like an old dog that barked once too loud and got kicked for its trouble. Meanwhile, I sit on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the water reflect the sky. Sometimes new residents wave from rented paddleboards, grateful for the access I lease them, free of fine print or fake rules. And I wave back. They don't know the war that was fought here. They just enjoy the peace that followed it. A year passed. Not quickly, not slowly. Just with the kind of quiet momentum you only feel when you've already won. The HOA had shriveled into something purely ornamental. Like a scarecrow in a storm, still standing but hollowed out, waterlogged, and slouched under its own irrelevance. Janet never came back. Her house sat on the market for 7 months before selling at a loss. Apparently, reputation does impact curb appeal, especially when every neighbor knows you were forced out by the man across the lake who doesn't speak much but owns the very land your gutters drain into. Brad? Last I heard, he was working at a car dealership 2 counties over. Someone told me he tried to start a podcast about community governance and couldn't get past episode 3. Good. Let them rot in the fog of their own forgotten ambitions. Of course, nothing stays quiet forever. This past spring, I got a visit. Not from the HOA. God, no. They'd learned that lesson. This time it was a real estate developer. Polished, smiling, tan in a way that suggested tanning beds, not sunlight. He came with offers. Big ones. "We'd love to put a few premium lake homes on the North Ridge," he said, pointing at my map like he was reading a menu. "You'd be looking at 7 figures just for the rights, and we'd name the trail loop after you. Harrow Ridge has a ring to it." He smiled. Big, white, corporate. I leaned back, sipped my coffee. Same mug, same porch, different war. "You see that ridge?" I asked. He nodded. "Gorgeous property. It was the last piece I bought, the one no one thought was worth a damn. Too steep, too rocky, just some old mining debris and pine scrub." He nodded again, politely, not getting it. "I bought that ridge because it's the one place in this valley that can't be seen from anywhere else," I said. "I keep a chair up there. Sometimes I hike up with a sandwich, sit, and just listen." "To what?" "Nothing," I said. "Which is exactly what I'm trying to preserve." He left without a counteroffer. That's when I knew they'd finally gotten the message. Word travels in places like this. People talk, especially when things don't happen. No board drama, no violations, no sudden HOA meetings about flagpole heights. Just calm. The lake has taken on a different rhythm, one that isn't dictated by printed newsletters or Janet's obsession with boat colors. People paddle out at dusk. Dogs run along the shoreline again. Someone even hosts open mic nights at their dock on Saturdays. Light guitar, bad poetry, and laughter echoing off the ridge. I don't attend, but I listen. From my porch, or sometimes from that chair up high where no one sees. Because monthly dues, but in the right to say no and make it stick. Some folks say I overreacted, that I could have just attended a board meeting and smoothed it out, that maybe I enjoy the control too much. Let them think that. They weren't here when the SUV pulled up. They didn't see the clipboard. They didn't hear the deputy try to explain why my land was being absorbed, like I was some tenant lucky enough to be allowed to stay. They didn't have to rebuild what silence is worth after someone tried to take it from you. I did, and I'll keep doing it. Because out here, past the maps and the redrawn lines and the pettiness of pretend politicians, there's a different kind of power. The kind that doesn't need permission. The kind that knows where every boundary lies and who owns it.